Hello everyone, I'm Asian Guy. There is a slow structural development unfolding across advanced economies that almost no one talks about directly. It isn't a recession, it isn't a market crash, it isn't a political shock. It's the quiet aging of institutions that were designed for a different economic world, now operating far beyond the conditions they were built for. And this matters because long-term economic resilience doesn't fail all at once. It erodes gradually through systems that still look functional on the surface, but have lost their ability to adapt under stress. Most people aren't paying attention because nothing appears broken yet, but that's exactly how institutional fragility accumulates. Before we go further, subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear explains a shift most people still haven't noticed. When we talk about institutions, we're not just talking about governments. We're talking about central banks, fiscal systems, legal frameworks, regulatory bodies, financial markets, and the informal norms that coordinate behavior across the economy. These institutions were largely shaped in the mid-20th century, under conditions of younger populations, rapid productivity growth, modest debt levels, and expanding industrial capacity. They were built to manage expansion, not stagnation. They were designed to smooth cycles, not to permanently suppress volatility or absorb continuous shocks. Let me walk you through how aging institutions quietly lose resilience. At the surface level, things still look stable. Inflation targets remain in place, budgets continue to pass, banks still clear transactions, markets still open every morning. But stability in process is not the same thing as resilience in structure. Over time, institutions adapt not by redesigning themselves, but by stretching their mandates. Temporary tools become permanent fixtures. Emergency measures get normalized. Rules designed as exceptions slowly turn into baseline operating procedures. Look closely at monetary policy. Central banks were originally designed as backstops, not engines of growth. Their credibility rested on restraint, predictability, and distance from fiscal authority. Over the past 2 decades, their role has expanded dramatically. Balance sheets have grown, market intervention has become routine, asset prices have become policy-sensitive variables. This didn't happen because of conspiracy or incompetence. It happened because institutional incentives favored short-term stabilization over long-term integrity. Now notice what changed. Each intervention reduced immediate pain, but increased long-term dependence. Each cycle required larger responses to achieve the same effect. This is what aging systems do. They compensate for declining effectiveness by increasing intensity. The system still works, but it works harder to do less. The same pattern appears in fiscal policy. Debt accumulation is not inherently destabilizing. What matters is growth relative to obligations. But aging institutions struggle to reverse fiscal expansion once it becomes embedded. Political systems optimize for distribution, not sustainability. Spending commitments harden. Revenue assumptions soften. Deficits stop being cyclical and start becoming structural. Fiscal policy becomes less about long-term capacity and more about preserving short-term equilibrium. This is where incentives matter. Institutions don't fail because people stop caring. They fail because internal incentives reward preservation over reform. No actor is punished for extending the status quo. Reform carries immediate cost and delayed benefit. Delay carries immediate comfort and deferred risk. Over time, the rational choice for each institution becomes collectively destabilizing. But this is where it becomes important. As institutions age, they also become more complex. Layers of regulation pile up. Oversight expands. Compliance replaces judgment. Complexity creates the illusion of control while quietly reducing adaptability. When stress arrives, decision-making slows. Coordination weakens. Responsibility diffuses. The system responds mechanically instead of intelligently. This pattern has appeared before. Late-stage empires, mature financial systems, and heavily institutionalized economies all show the same traits. Not collapse, but brittleness. The system functions smoothly under normal conditions, but responds poorly to novel shocks. It becomes excellent at managing yesterday's risks and increasingly vulnerable to tomorrow's. Now look at productivity. Productivity growth is the ultimate source of economic resilience. It allows debt to be serviced, demographics to be absorbed, and social expectations to be met. Aging institutions tend to misallocate capital because incentives shift from innovation to preservation. Capital flows toward assets with policy protection rather than productive risk. Financial returns detach from real economic output. This is not accidental. Financialization rewards scale, leverage, and proximity to policy. Over time, the economy becomes less about producing new value and more about reallocating existing claims. Institutions adapt to manage this reality rather than challenge it, but in doing so, they reduce the system's ability to generate future growth. Let me slow this down. An economy's resilience depends on trust. Trust in currency, trust in contracts, trust in rules being stable and applied consistently. Aging institutions don't lose trust through dramatic failure. They lose it through gradual inconsistency. Rules change quietly, mandates stretch subtly. Exceptions multiply, people don't panic, they adjust. Investors adjust by shortening time horizons, firms adjust by prioritizing buybacks over expansion. Households adjust by leveraging assets instead of income. None of this looks like crisis behavior. It looks rational. But collectively, it signals declining confidence in the long-term framework. This is where we stop thinking mechanically and start thinking structurally. Institutions derive legitimacy from effectiveness. When effectiveness declines, credibility must be maintained through narrative, communication, and reassurance. Over time, words replace capacity. Guidance replaces margin of safety. Confidence becomes performative rather than earned. That doesn't mean failure is imminent. It means resilience is thinning. And when resilience thins, the system becomes more sensitive to shocks it would once have absorbed quietly. The danger isn't a single event. It's accumulation. Small stresses compound. Policy responses arrive faster, larger, and with fewer remaining tools. When institutions reach this stage, the most important shift is psychological, not mechanical. The system still operates, payments clear, laws are enforced, markets function. But confidence subtly changes shape. It becomes conditional, provisional. People stop assuming continuity and start planning around uncertainty. Not panic, adjustment. Look at demographics. Aging populations place predictable strain on fiscal systems, labor markets, and productivity growth. These are not surprises. They've been visible for decades. But aging institutions struggle to absorb demographic reality because their commitments were made under very different assumptions. Pension systems, healthcare models, and social contracts were designed when populations were younger, workforces were expanding, and growth could cover inefficiency. As those conditions fade, institutions compensate by borrowing time. Literally and figuratively, debt becomes the bridge between promises made and capacity constrained. Again, this isn't reckless behavior. It's institutional self-preservation. Cutting commitments undermines legitimacy. Raising taxes undermines competitiveness. Borrowing postpones conflict. So borrowing becomes structural. And once debt becomes structural, policy flexibility narrows. This is where long-cycle risk quietly builds. Monetary authorities are asked to do more with less credibility. Fiscal authorities are constrained by past decisions. Regulatory bodies manage increasingly complex systems with outdated frameworks. Each institution remains rational internally, but the overall system loses coherence. Coordination weakens. Trade-offs become harder to acknowledge openly. Notice how policy language changes in these periods. Certainty gives way to reassurance. Forward guidance becomes more frequent. Transparency increases, not because confidence is high, but because confidence needs maintenance. Institutions talk more because they can do less. This matters because economic systems ultimately run on belief. Currency value is belief. Credit is belief. Legal enforcement relies on belief in fairness and durability. When institutions age, belief doesn't disappear. It fragments. Different actors hold different assumptions about the future. Time horizons shorten. Optionality becomes more valuable than commitment. Investors respond by favoring liquidity over productivity. Companies respond by favoring financial engineering over capital investment. Governments respond by favoring stabilization over reform. None of these choices are irrational in isolation. Together, they reduce adaptive capacity. This is the paradox of mature systems. They become excellent at avoiding immediate pain while increasing long-term vulnerability. The feedback loops that once forced reform are dampened, losses are socialized, volatility is suppressed, signals get distorted, risk doesn't vanish, it migrates. Historically, this phase doesn't announce itself with collapse. It announces itself with repetition, repeated interventions, repeated warnings, repeated assurances that tools remain available. Each cycle resolves less cleanly than the last. And here's the key point. Aging institutions don't fail because they stop functioning. They fail because they stop learning. They become optimized for a past environment and structurally resistant to change. Reform threatens internal stability more than external risk, so adaptation slows. This doesn't mean the system is about to break. It means its margin for error is thinner than it appears. It means shocks that would once have been absorbed now require response. It means policy effectiveness depends increasingly on credibility rather than capacity. From a long-term perspective, this reshapes behavior. Households become more cautious. Firms become more defensive. Governments become more reactive. The system drifts from expansion toward maintenance. That's what institutional aging looks like in real time. It's quiet, it's technical, it's slow, and it's easy to ignore because nothing dramatic happens all at once. But resilience isn't about drama. It's about depth, about slack, about the ability to absorb surprise without improvisation. As institutions age, that slack disappears. Over the next decade, this will matter more than any single policy decision or election cycle. Not because of a specific outcome, but because of constrained choices, fewer good options, more trade-offs. less room for error. Understanding this isn't about fear. It's about clarity, about seeing systems as they are, not as they were designed to be. About recognizing that stability maintained through continuous intervention is not the same as stability earned through structural strength. This is the underlying risk most discussions miss. Not collapse, not crisis, but gradual erosion of adaptive capacity in institutions we rely on to manage complexity. And once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. In policy, in markets, in behavior, in expectations. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, share this, and stay alert. Because what's happening beneath the surface right now matters more than most people realize.